Chapter 1. A Forgotten Request. Jallen was a man of few words, but a man of many hands skilled in the language of machinery, the intricate dance of cogs and circuits and engines that whispered secrets only he could understand. His workshop sat perched on the fringes of the outer colonies, a small, scrappy outpost on the edge of known space where the stars were fewer, but the dust was plentiful. The landscape beyond the settlement was barren, a harsh expanse of cracked rock and rust-colored sand stretching endlessly under a pale, faded sky. Most people had long since forgotten this place, and Jallen liked it that way. He was not one for crowds or chatter, finding peace in the solitary rhythm of wrenches turning and plasma welders humming, the occasional crackle of radio static mixing with the scent of grease and metal. Here, amidst piles of discarded parts and ancient starship fragments, he could breathe. Despite the quiet, Jallen's life was anything but simple. The outer colonies were a patchwork of scavengers, traders, and desperate souls eking out a living on the margins of a sprawling galactic civilization that often seemed indifferent to them. Supplies were scarce, fuel was precious, and every ship that limped into his workshop told a story of struggle. Jallen fixed what others gave up on, from rusted freighters barely holding together to battered drones whose only crime was age. His reputation grew quietly, a whisper among pilots and traders, that if your ship could still fly, Jallen could make it soar again. Yet beneath the grease-stained exterior and pragmatic demeanor, something lingered, a faint, persistent yearning for connection, a question unanswered. The universe was vast, and humans were just one thread in its sprawling tapestry of species and civilizations. But the loneliness of space was no respecter of races or borders. Jallen had always told himself he preferred solitude, that his companions were engines and star charts. But sometimes the silence pressed too hard. On nights when the twin moons rose low and the wind stirred the dust outside his shop, he would stare up at the stars, wondering if out there, somewhere beyond the void, there might be something or someone who could understand the quiet inside him. One evening, as Jallen sat beneath the flickering light of a rusted holoscreen, sifting through the endless hum of galactic trade catalogs and secondhand advertisements, his eyes caught a peculiar listing buried among countless others. It was a peculiar relic from a bygone era, a simple, almost crude message that seemed laughably out of place in the modern age of instant communication and interstellar commerce. The words blinked on the screen in a faded green font, almost as if struggling to hold onto life themselves. Alien mail order wife. Low cost. High potential. Ready for new home. The image next to the text was grainy, a faded portrait of a female alien, draped in ragged clothes that had seen better centuries, her eyes large and hauntingly luminous despite the weariness etched into her delicate features. Jallen blinked, unsure if his tired eyes were deceiving him. The idea felt like a bad joke, some leftover oddity from an age when alien matchmaking was an underground, shadowy business whispered about in back alleys and forgotten corners of spaceports. But there it was, real enough to pique his curiosity. The catalog described her as a rare find, a discarded soul from a planet known for its brutal deserts and unforgiving climate where survival was a daily battle, and many of her kind were sold off or abandoned when deemed unfit for the harsh demands of their society. She was listed as unused and ready for a new life, terms that sounded clinical but, to Jallen, carried an unexpected weight. The more he read, the more the absurdity of the listing gnawed at him, but not with ridicule. Instead, a strange warmth stirred deep within his chest, a mix of pity, fascination, and something he dared not name. Here was a being, lost and forgotten, with no voice but the cold, mechanical words of a sales pitch. And yet, in those haunting eyes, Jallen saw a flicker of hope, a glimmer of something waiting to be reclaimed from the shadows. For all his years among engines and starships, he had never encountered a mystery like this, a puzzle not made of metal but of flesh and spirit. The decision was impulsive, reckless even. Without consulting anyone, without pondering the consequences, Jallen reached out through the galaxy's sluggish communications network and placed a request. It was a small thing, a simple transfer of credits, but it carried the weight of a promise he didn't yet understand. The contract was clear and cold. He would become her sponsor, her caretaker for a fixed term, with the right to provide her a home, and in return, she would be his companion, a partner chosen through a marketplace that commodified life itself. The concept was foreign, uncomfortable, and yet strangely hopeful. Jallen was not a man of fancy gestures or grand romantic ideals, but he knew what it was to fix things, to bring broken machines back to life. Perhaps, he thought quietly, there was a chance to do the same for a broken soul. The weeks that followed were filled with restless anticipation. Jallen continued his work with methodical precision, repairing starship engines and recalibrating navigation arrays, but his thoughts kept drifting to the distant arrival. When the transport finally came, it was nothing like the sleek ships of the Central Systems, no elegant docking maneuver or welcoming committee. Instead, a battered, unmarked freighter lumbered down from the stars, groaning under the weight of its forgotten cargo. As it settled on the cracked landing pad outside the settlement, a figure emerged, small, fragile, swathed in tattered rags that fluttered in the harsh wind. She was nothing like the pristine images on the catalog. Her skin, a pale shade of green marred by dirt and exhaustion, her luminous eyes dulled by hardship. The elegant alien beauty promised in the ad was replaced by a woman who looked like she had been through wars not of flesh, but of survival. Her gaze was wary, flickering with a mixture of fear and fragile hope as she stepped cautiously into the new world that awaited her. There was no fanfare, no ceremony, just silence, broken only by the distant hum of machinery and the soft clink of her ragged boots on metal flooring. "Jallen Morick?" she asked, voice trembling but steady. "That's me," he replied, stepping forward with a mix of curiosity and caution. He found himself suddenly uncertain of what to say, of how to welcome someone whose life had been reduced to such raw vulnerability. She looked at him, her large eyes reflecting 1,000 unspoken stories. "I am Zerella," she said softly, as if the name itself was a fragile bridge to a new existence. "I am your companion now." Jallen's heart tightened. The reality of the situation crashed over him like a tidal wave. This was no simple transaction. It was the beginning of something he hadn't prepared for. Zerella's presence filled the empty spaces of his shop and his life with a weight he didn't expect. He noticed the subtle tremors in her hands, the way she flinched at sudden sounds, the haunted shadows behind her eyes that no light could reach. She was a mystery wrapped in sorrow, and Jallen felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. He motioned for her to follow him inside, guiding her through the cluttered space filled with parts and tools. She moved hesitantly, her every step a careful negotiation with an unfamiliar world. Jallen watched as she explored the room, eyes darting from one object to another, absorbing details with quiet wonder and unease. The silence between them was thick, but not uncomfortable. There was a shared understanding that words were not enough to bridge the gulf of their pasts. That night, as the twin moons cast pale light through the cracked windows, Jallen found himself staring at the sleeping figure on the makeshift cot. Zerella looked smaller, more fragile in the shadows, her ragged clothes hanging loose on her slender frame. The faint rise and fall of her breath was the only sign of life in the quiet room. Jallen's mind raced with questions he dared not voice aloud. What had she endured to come here? What ghosts followed her in the silence? And most urgently, what was he to do now? For the first time in years, Jallen felt the stirrings of something more than solitude or duty. He felt the weight of responsibility not just for a body in need of shelter, but for a soul desperate to be seen, to be valued. Somewhere deep within him, beneath the layers of grease and cynicism, a fragile hope took root. Perhaps, he thought, this ragged alien woman held a worth that no marketplace could measure, a story that needed more than quiet acceptance. Maybe, just maybe, she was the missing piece to a life he hadn't yet dared to imagine. And so, with the stars watching silently above, a human mechanic and an alien mail-order wife began the tentative first steps toward an unexpected future, one forged not from contracts or commerce, but from the quiet recognition of worth hidden beneath rags and rust. The days that followed were unlike anything Jallen had anticipated. His workshop, usually a sanctuary of quiet efficiency where every bolt tightened and every circuit calibrated fit like a precise piece in an endless puzzle, now echoed with unfamiliar sounds: the soft shuffle of hesitant footsteps, the rustle of threadbare fabric, and the fragile breath of a woman learning to live again. Zerella remained cautious, moving through the cramped space with a mixture of curiosity and wariness, as if every corner held a memory too painful to confront. She barely spoke, choosing instead to observe, to listen to the hum of the machines and the mechanical heartbeat of the settlement beyond the dusty windows. Jallen found himself watching her, often from the corner of his eye, struck by contradictions that made her both enigmatic and achingly real. Her skin, pale green and streaked with dirt, bore the scars of survival, faint scratches and bruises telling tales of harsh winds, rough terrain, and maybe something darker, deeper still. Her luminous eyes, once vibrant like twin moons, now flickered with shadows, eyes that had seen too much and yet held on to a fragile spark of hope. She reminded him of a shattered crystal, fractured but catching the light in unexpected ways. He tried not to let his thoughts wander too far into places he wasn't ready to admit. He was a mechanic, after all, not a savior. His hands were meant for tools, not healing broken spirits. Yet, every time she looked at him with that faint, uncertain gaze, something inside him shifted, a gentle stirring of empathy, a pull towards something more human than metal and oil. Zerella's nights were restless. Jallen could hear her soft murmurs, whispers in an alien tongue, fragments of memories that refused to stay buried. One evening, unable to contain his concern, he asked softly, "What were you running from?" She looked up, startled, her eyes wide but hesitant. For a long moment, silence hung between them like a fragile glass, trembling but unbroken. Finally, she whispered, "From a world that cast me away, from a life that wanted me dead." Her words settled heavily in the air, weightier than any physical burden. Jallen, who had only ever dealt with the cold precision of machines, felt the raw ache of loneliness echoed back from a place far beyond his understanding. He didn't know what horrors she had escaped, but he knew enough about survival to realize that her scars were not just on her skin, they were etched deep into her soul. Days blurred together as Jallen continued his work, often glancing toward Zerella as she cautiously adapted to her new surroundings. She showed moments of quiet fascination, tracing the edges of a broken drone with delicate fingers, watching the sparks fly as he repaired an ancient engine, occasionally reaching out to touch the cool metal surfaces, perhaps searching for something solid to hold onto. Yet her guarded nature remained, a wall built from years of pain and rejection. In the rare moments when she spoke, her voice was soft but deliberate, tinged with a subtle accent that spoke of distant worlds and lost cultures. "This place, it is different," she said once, eyes scanning the cluttered workshop. "It is strange, but not cruel." Jallen smiled faintly, appreciating the rare warmth in her words. "It's not much," he admitted, "but it's home. For now." The concept of home seemed foreign to Zerella. She looked around the dimly lit room, the walls stained with years of dust and the faint scent of engine oil. "Home," she whispered, as if tasting the word for the first time. "A place to live, to be." Her innocence in such a simple truth struck Jallen deeply. He had built walls around his own heart, shielding himself from disappointment and loss. But here was someone who, despite all she had endured, still yearned for the same thing he had tried to deny himself belonging. One afternoon, while Jallen was bent over the gutted engine of a starship that had seen better days, Zerella approached him with hesitant steps. In her hands, she held a small, worn bundle wrapped in cloth. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the fabric to reveal a faded trinket, a delicate piece of jewelry wrought from metals that glimmered faintly even in the low light. "This," she said softly, "was given to me before they left me. It was meant to be a gift, a symbol of worth." Jallen took the trinket carefully, turning it over in his hands. The intricate designs were unfamiliar, elegant, and ancient. "What does it mean to you?" She paused, her eyes reflecting a mixture of sorrow and hope. "It means I mattered once, that I am more than the rags I wear, that there is value in what was discarded." For the first time since her arrival, Jallen saw a spark ignite in her eyes, a fragile but undeniable flicker of pride and identity. He understood then that this was not just a gift of metal and craft, but a tether to a past she wasn't ready to forget and a beacon for the future she hoped to claim. Days stretched into weeks, and the tentative bond between them deepened in subtle, unspoken ways. Jallen found himself opening the workshop door for her, offering her warmth against the cold nights, sharing meals of humble rations beneath the flickering glow of the settlement's aging street lamps. Zerella, in turn, began to shed layers of hesitation, her eyes gradually losing the haunted look that had marked her arrival. The settlement's few residents whispered behind closed doors about the strange arrangement, a human mechanic and an alien woman no one had claimed, bound by a contract born of desperation and circumstance. Some regarded it with suspicion, others with curiosity, but none could deny the quiet strength that grew between the two. One night, as a cold wind howled outside and the stars glimmered faintly beyond the grimy windows, Jallen sat beside Zerella, watching as she traced patterns in the dust on the workbench. She looked up suddenly, her eyes meeting his with a tentative vulnerability. "Do you think I can belong here?" she asked, voice barely more than a whisper. Jallen swallowed hard, the weight of his own loneliness mirrored in her question. "I don't know what tomorrow holds," he said slowly, "but I know this here. With me, you are not alone." Her lips curved into a faint, grateful smile, the first true smile he had seen from her. In that moment, surrounded by the relics of broken machines and whispered hopes, two lost souls began to find a fragile kind of hope. Neither was perfect, neither was whole, but together, they stood at the edge of something new, a chance to heal, to rebuild, and perhaps, to love. And so, the story of an alien mail order wife who arrived in rags and a human mechanic who saw her worth began not in grand halls or shining stars, but in the quiet spaces where hope dares to grow amidst dust and rust. Chapter 2. The Unseen Depths. The days after Zerella's arrival unfolded in a rhythm both alien and strangely familiar to Jallen Morick. The mechanical pulse of his workshop, the steady drip of coolant, the faint hiss of welders igniting, the metallic clang of tools returning to their places was now punctuated by the quiet presence of a woman who seemed to carry entire worlds of pain in her slender frame. Jallen watched her closely, noting the subtle signs of her struggle to adapt, how she flinched at sudden noises, how her gaze darted anxiously when unfamiliar faces passed by outside, how she clutched the tattered remnants of her ragged clothes as if they were a fragile shield against the unforgiving universe. It was as if Zerella carried a heavy weight invisible to everyone but him. A weight born not only of the harsh deserts of her homeworld, but of rejection and abandonment that no starship could transport away. Her silence spoke volumes. Words, it seemed, were luxuries she could not afford. Each day she survived, she seemed to pay a debt of silence to memories too sharp to voice aloud. Jallen felt the ache of that silence deeply. He understood loss. Not just the physical kind that tore through metal and bone, but the kind that hollowed out the spaces inside a person until they were shadows of who they once were. He tried to bridge the gap. At first, with practical gestures, a warm meal prepared from the few rations he could spare, clothes fashioned from scraps that, while humble, offered her protection from the biting cold nights. Then, through the language of machinery, he showed her how to handle tools, how to identify parts and repair the broken engines that lined his workshop walls. Watching her tentative fingers trace over worn circuits and corroded gears, Jallen saw sparks of something unexpected, a flicker of curiosity, a fragile hint of belonging. Yet, beneath the surface, Zerella remained an enigma. Her eyes often drifted to the far corners of the room, where shadows lengthened and memories whispered. Sometimes, in moments when Jallen was engrossed in his work, she would speak in a voice barely above a breath, sharing fragments of a past that seemed both distant and painfully close. "My people, they cast me aside," she confided once, voice trembling. "Too weak, too different. They believed I was a burden to carry." Jallen's heart clenched. In his world, weakness was often synonymous with failure, a flaw to be fixed or discarded. Yet, here was a woman who had endured rejection far beyond anything he could imagine, her very existence questioned by those meant to protect her. "That's not true," he said quietly, wiping grease from his hands. "Weakness doesn't define you. Survival does. And you've survived." She looked at him then, really looked, her eyes searching his face as if trying to decipher a code written in the quiet steadiness of his voice. "Survival is not living," she said softly. "I want to live." to be more than shadows and silence. The vulnerability in her words struck Jallen like a sudden jolt, awakening something long dormant inside him. For all his years of solitude, he realized he, too, was desperate to live, not just exist in the mechanical hum of his workshop, but to find meaning beyond the wrench and the engine. In Zerella's eyes, he saw a reflection of his own hidden yearning, and for the first time, the idea of companionship didn't seem so distant or impossible. They began to share moments of quiet intimacy, not of words, but of presence. In the long nights when the twin moons cast their pale glow through the dusty windows, Jallen would find Zerella seated by the flickering holoscreen, watching the stars trace their eternal paths across the cosmos. Sometimes he would join her, his broad hands resting on cold metal as he traced imaginary constellations with her slender fingers. In these shared silences, a fragile trust blossomed, a promise unspoken but deeply felt. One evening, as the workshop was bathed in the soft amber light of a failing sun, Jallen noticed Zerella staring intently at a broken drone that lay abandoned in a corner. Its once sleek frame was battered and scarred, its circuits silent. Without hesitation, she reached out and gently lifted the drone, cradling it as though it were a wounded creature. Her touch was careful, tender, far from the roughness of the mechanic's usual work. Curious, Jallen approached. "You want to fix it?" She nodded, eyes shining with quiet determination. "I want to give it life again, to show that even broken things can have worth." Moved by her resolve, Jallen guided her through the intricate process of repair, teaching her how to reconnect circuits, how to reignite dormant energy cores, how to breathe life into cold machinery. As they worked side by side, something profound unfolded, not just the revival of a drone, but the tentative awakening of a woman who had been broken by circumstance but refused to be defined by it. The repaired drone hummed softly to life, its sensors blinking in gratitude, and Zerella's smile that followed was radiant and genuine, a rare light in the darkness that had long surrounded her. "See," she whispered, "life can begin again." Jallen smiled, feeling a swell of pride not just in the machine they had resurrected, but in the woman who had dared to hope. "You're right," he said, voice steady. "And so can you." Yet, even as trust grew, so did the invisible scars she bore. There were nights when Zerella's eyes filled with tears she would not let fall, when the shadows of her past crept close and threatened to pull her back into the void. Jallen would find her staring into the night, lips moving in silent prayer or remembrance, a battle unseen but fiercely fought. He wanted to ask about the people who had cast her away, to understand the depth of her suffering, but he also knew that some wounds could only be healed slowly, with patience and care. So he offered what he could: the warmth of companionship, the steadiness of his presence, and the unwavering belief that she was more than the sum of her past. In quiet moments, he caught glimpses of the woman beneath the rags and scars, a soul capable of laughter, of fierce determination, of love. And he realized that he, too, was changing. The solitude he had clung to began to feel hollow, replaced by a yearning to build something new, something real. As the weeks slipped by, Zerella and Jallen began to weave their separate threads into a fragile tapestry of shared existence. The mechanic who had once seen her as a mere contract now saw her as a partner, a person worthy of love and respect. And Zerella, once discarded and broken, found in Jallen not just a sponsor, but a sanctuary, a place where she could begin to reclaim her worth and rewrite her story. The universe outside their small workshop remained vast and indifferent, filled with dangers and unknowns. But inside, amidst the hum of engines and the glow of flickering lights, a new chapter was unfolding, one born of healing, hope, and the unspoken promise of belonging. Despite the tentative hope growing between them, the scars of the past refused to fade so easily. Zerella's heart was a delicate mechanism, one that had endured more fractures than most could imagine. Each smile she wore was tempered by the fear that it might shatter under the weight of old wounds. Some mornings, Jallen would find her staring into the horizon beyond the settlement, eyes distant and clouded, as if trying to escape memories that clawed at the edges of her mind. He wanted to reach out, to pull her back from the brink, but the shadows she fought were not his to command. In those moments, silence became their shared language. Jallen would sit beside her, his broad hands steady and reassuring, grounding her in the fragile present. It was in these quiet times that the true repair work took place, not in the hum of engines or the sparks of welding, but in the gentle acceptance of vulnerability, the fearless willingness to bear each other's burdens without judgment or haste. One evening, as a storm of dust and wind battered the settlement's worn structures, Zerella revealed a fragment of her past that weighed heavily on her soul. "There was a night," she began, voice trembling, "when the desert claimed everything. My family, my home, the very people who were meant to protect me. They turned away. I was left to die beneath the cold stars." Jallen's heart ached at the rawness of her confession. He reached for her hand, the simple touch bridging the chasm of pain and loneliness. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered. "Not now." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, a testament to both sorrow and the faint glimmer of trust blossoming within. "I want to believe that," she said softly, "but sometimes the past feels like a shadow I can't escape." Jallen squeezed her hand gently. "We'll face those shadows together, step by step." The days that followed were filled with small, meaningful victories. Zerella began to speak more freely, her laughter ringing softly through the workshop like a fragile melody reclaiming its strength. She took to learning the intricacies of starship repair with an eager mind, her fingers growing adept at delicate tasks that mirrored the healing she sought for herself. Jallen found himself inspired by her resilience, a quiet strength that defied the odds stacked against her. Their evenings were spent beneath the flickering glow of holomaps, plotting courses among the stars, or sharing stories of distant worlds. Jallen revealed parts of himself rarely spoken, a childhood spent dreaming beneath the vast sky, the loneliness of endless space, and the fierce determination that had kept him alive in a galaxy that often felt cold and uncaring. Zerella listened, her eyes wide with empathy, offering a presence that softened the edges of his solitude. In return, she shared glimpses of her culture, the ancient songs of her people, the harsh beauty of deserts painted in shifting hues of gold and crimson, and the rituals that bound her kin to the stars above. Through these exchanges, a bridge formed, a connection that transcended the gulf between their worlds, rooted in shared humanity and the timeless quest for belonging. Yet, even as their bond deepened, uncertainties lingered. The contract that had brought Zerella to Jallen's doorstep was a constant reminder of the transactional nature of their beginning. There were moments when doubt crept into their fragile sanctuary, when the fear of loss threatened to unravel the delicate fabric they were weaving together. One night, beneath the watchful gaze of distant constellations, Zerella turned to Jallen with a question that weighed heavily on her heart. "What happens when the contract ends? Will you still want me?" Jallen met her gaze, the answer clear and unwavering. "I don't want you because of a contract. I want you because you are who you are. Not because of papers or agreements, but because you've become part of my life." Tears slipped down Zerella's cheeks, a mixture of relief and hope flooding her being. In that moment, the walls of fear crumbled, replaced by the promise of a future crafted by choice and love. Together, they stood on the precipice of a new beginning, one where the past shadows no longer defined them, and where the repair of a heart was as vital as the restoration of a broken engine. Their journey was far from over, but in the steady beat of shared breaths and the quiet strength of companionship, they found the courage to face whatever lay ahead. And so, amidst the hum of machines and the silent witness of the stars, Jallen and Zerella embraced the possibility of healing, not just of metal and flesh, but of two souls bound by hope and the unyielding power of love. The air inside the workshop was thick with a quiet tension that neither Jallen nor Zerella could fully explain, yet both felt it settling like dust on every surface. It was a tension born not of conflict, but of change, the kind that ripples beneath the surface of the familiar, promising that the world as they knew it was shifting in ways neither could have anticipated. The days had grown warmer, and with the shifting light of the twin moons casting long shadows through cracked windows, something indefinable blossomed in the small room they shared. Jallen found himself watching Zerella with a new awareness, seeing her not as the fragile, ragged woman who had arrived uncertain and afraid, but as someone who carried a quiet strength beneath the worn fabric of her clothes, beneath the scars that time could never fully erase. Her hands, once trembling and hesitant, now moved with deliberate grace as she helped him repair the aged ships and drones that found their way to his door. There was a rhythm to her work, a patience that mirrored the slow healing of her heart. One evening, after the hum of the day's labor had quieted, Jallen sat beside Zerella near the window, watching as the last slivers of daylight bled into the darkness. She looked up at him, eyes luminous with a tenderness he hadn't seen before. "I never thought I could belong," she said softly, her voice barely louder than the whisper of the wind outside. "But with you, it feels like home." He reached out, his hand gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, the rough calluses of his fingers tracing the delicate lines of her cheek. "You belong," he said simply, "more than I ever realized I could want." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of unspoken promises and fragile hopes hanging between them. Then, as if propelled by the sudden courage born of shared vulnerability, Zerella leaned in, her lips meeting his in a gentle kiss, tentative, searching, yet filled with a quiet certainty that left no room for doubt. In that moment, the boundaries of their past lives dissolved. She was no longer the mail-order wife in rags, nor was he just the solitary mechanic who had offered her shelter. They were two souls, battered but unbroken, forging a new story from the broken pieces left behind by a cruel universe. Their marriage was not marked by grand ceremonies or lavish celebrations, but by the simple, profound act of choosing each other every day. In the quiet moments of shared laughter and whispered dreams, in the steady presence beside a sputtering engine or beneath a sky heavy with stars, they discovered a love born not of circumstance, but of genuine connection and mutual respect. Zerella's strength grew with each passing day, her confidence no longer shackled by the ghosts of abandonment. She became more than a companion. She became a partner, a friend, a light in Jallen's once lonely world. Together, they faced the uncertainties of the outer colonies, the harsh winds, the suspicion of strangers, the endless challenges of survival. But now, armed with each other's trust and love, those challenges felt surmountable. And as the first light of dawn crept across the horizon, casting a golden glow over the weathered workshop, Jallen knew with unwavering certainty that the worth he had seen in a woman who arrived in rags was only the beginning. What they had built together was a testament to resilience, to hope, and to the unyielding power of seeing another's true value, beyond appearances, beyond past scars, beyond anything the universe could throw their way. They were no longer broken. They were whole. Together. The months that followed their union wove themselves into a tapestry of quiet resilience and growing joy. Jallen and Zerella, once two strangers thrown together by circumstance, had become an unbreakable team, each day stitching their lives closer with threads of trust, respect, and unwavering affection. The small workshop, once a place of solitude and mechanical labor, transformed into a sanctuary of laughter, shared dreams, and whispered promises beneath the ever-watchful stars. Jallen, the mechanic who had only known the language of machines, found himself fluent in a new dialect, the subtle, unspoken cues of a woman who had survived unimaginable pain, yet dared to hope again. He learned the gentle cadence of her smiles, the quiet strength behind her quiet moments, and the fierce fire that sparked in her eyes when she spoke of a future they could build together. In her presence, the weight of loneliness he had carried for so long began to lift, replaced by a warmth he had never thought possible. Zerella, once shrouded in rags and haunted by memories of abandonment, bloomed into a woman who radiated dignity and courage. The scars she bore became stories of survival rather than marks of shame. She found purpose not just in repairing broken ships or learning new skills, but in nurturing the fragile hope that love could heal even the deepest wounds. With Jallen by her side, she discovered that worth was not measured by where one came from, but by the strength to rise and embrace life anew. Their marriage was not defined by grand declarations or the approval of distant societies, but by the simple, profound choice to stand together against a universe that often seemed indifferent. When neighbors whispered and traders cast wary glances, they met it with quiet confidence, knowing that what bound them transcended contracts and expectations. Their love was a rebellion and assertion that two souls, no matter how battered or lost, could find completeness in each other. One evening, beneath the vast canopy of stars that stretched endlessly above the outer colonies. Jallen and Zerella stood side by side at the threshold of their workshop. The air was cool, carrying the scent of distant rain and blooming desert flora. Zerella looked up at the sky, her hand finding Jallen's, their fingers entwining like the roots of ancient trees. "Do you think we're ready?" she asked softly. Jallen smiled, his gaze steady and sure. "Ready for whatever comes." Together, as they stepped into the night, their shadows merged into two lives no longer defined by past sorrows or uncertain futures, but by a shared journey of hope, healing, and love. The galaxy beyond was vast and unpredictable, but in each other, they had found a home worth fighting for. And so, the alien mail order wife who arrived in rags and the human mechanic who saw her true worth wrote a story not of despair, but of triumph. A story that whispered through the stars, that even in the darkest corners of the universe, where hope seems lost, the light of understanding and compassion can illuminate the path to redemption and belonging. Their story was just beginning.